Hey there booktube, welcome back to my channel and welcome to A Closer Book. This is a series where I talk about 3 of my recent reads in my quest to read 102 books in 2017. In this video we're going to talk about books 73 to 75. First up is Energon by Jamaica Kincaid, and this is the 3rd book that I'm reading from this author this year. Previously I read Mr. Potter as well as See Now Then, and now we're up to Energon, which is a collection of vignettes that tells the story of this young girl named Annie John, who's growing up in Antigua. Her mother's name is also Annie John, and so the book is about this young girl, but it's also about her mother, about their relationship, about the way this girl is learning about herself but also learning about her mother at the same time, in her comparisons between the relationship that she has with her mother while they're at home together and the relationships and friendships that she forges with other people outside of the home when she starts going to school, how she starts making comparisons between her mother and these other people, the comparison between her relationship with her mother and her relationship with her father, and just how this girl is becoming her own person and struggling to free herself from the reins that her mother puts on her. And as she is like emerging from this netting of cords that her mother has bound her with, realizing that the cords that she feels like are binding her also the umbilical cord that is sustaining her. And so the story that this book tells is very fascinating. It's familiar to me because I grew up in the Caribbean in much the same way that this protagonist is describing her life. But this book is just rich with imagery and meaning, and you know, because the girl and her mother have the same name, you think you're reading about the child, but you're really reading about the mother, and it's fascinating. I actually read this one during the booktubeathon, so I'm going to go ahead and link that video so you can see where I was reading that book and maybe more of my reaction to what this novel contains. Next, I read this biblical fiction entitled The Song of Hana by Etzioni-Halevy, and this one is a book that someone from my church lent to me, so it's not a book that I probably would have picked up on my own, but I really enjoyed reading it. If you're not familiar with the biblical story, Hannah is the mother of one of the Old Testament prophets, Samuel, and we first meet her in the Bible when she goes to the temple to pray. The priest sees her praying, and she's praying so desperately and openly that the priest at first thinks that she's drunk, but when she explains that she's praying desperately for a child, the priest intercedes on her behalf, and eventually she does conceive and she has this son. And so she brings the child back to the priest for her son to be dedicated to the Lord and to be raised up in the temple. So the Song of Hannah, the novel, is about the backstory to that. What happens that makes Hannah so desperate to have a child, and what happens in her life after she does conceive, after she has the child, after she leaves the child in the temple to be raised. What is her life like? And so the backstory actually does tell the story of Hannah, which is how she ends up being married to a man who has another wife, how she and this other wife named Penina start off as friends but become bitter rivals, and just what the dynamics are like in a house where a man has 2 wives that he both loves in very different ways. However, while the title suggests that the book should be about Hannah, the book could also have been just as adequately titled The Song of Penina, Penina being the co-wife, because it's just as much about her as it is about Hannah. In fact, in the book, Penina is described in such glowing, dazzling, seductive ways that you end up kind of wanting to root for Penina. The story is told from multiple perspectives, so you get to see how both women react to each other, the choices that both women make in their lives, and how they come to make those choices and why, and what the effects are. It is a really well written book, and whether you're a fan of Christian fiction or not, I actually recommend this as a fun read. And finally, I also read the 2016 Man Booker awardee, The Sellout by Beatty. This one is still a little confusing to me, that I'm not sure how I feel about it. In one breath, the story is about a man who, after losing his father and thinking that his father's legacy is being diminished without him actually getting the due that he deserves, starts to overreact to his town also not being named on the map anymore, and so he decides to do something big to garner attention for his town and kind of put his town back on the map, which you would probably think is just a metaphor, just him transferring his emotions about his father into something practical that he can actually do something about. So we have this character who needs to do something big to get national attention. What's the something big that he decides to do? He accepts another African American man to become his slave, and together they bring back slavery and segregation in their town to the extent that they segregate the public bus and the schools and so on. That's big enough to garner national attention, right? But on the other hand, this is a book about relationships, about the things that break relationships apart, but also about the ones that endure and how they do. Like the sacrifices that the people who love us actually do make for us to become the people that we are, or to acknowledge it. And also the things that they do to help us show us who we are and where we are and where we need to go and so on. I thought that this was a satirical look at some of the experiences that African Americans have had in this country in the past, say, 100 years or so. Post-slavery, and dealing with like subtle racism in a lot of forms, where people sometimes feel ignored to the point where they feel like the only thing that they can do to get attention is to do something negative. And if a person is really upset about that, what are some of the things that they might do in order to get attention? Some children might act out, adults might become criminals, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that I endorse any of those behaviors, but I could understand how a person who is fed up with anonymity might behave. But in listening to the author being interviewed, he has said that this book is not satiric, and so that's a little confusing to me. So this is a book that I plan to reread at some point, because I think that it has many layers that I haven't quite scratched yet. And I do really want to love this book. I want to enjoy it. So I will reread it at some point, and maybe we'll talk some more about it then. But if you do have comments, or if you've read this book and see it in a different light, or want to share something with me, please go ahead and leave that in the comments so we can talk some more about it. The other thing I wasn't overly excited about this book was the writing style. I felt that there were moments where the writing brought me out of the novel and brought me back to focus on the author, which I think is kind of antithetical to what novels are supposed to do. Like, the writing is supposed to pull me into a story, let me immerse completely in this world that the author has created, and take the focus away from who the author really is. And I didn't feel like this book achieved that, although, like I said, I didn't completely understand everything about it. So please, if you have thoughts, share them, and let's chat in the comments. So that's it. That's a closer book of these 3 recent reads. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below if you've read any of these. I want to chat about them, especially The Sellout by Beatty, because I want to know more from you. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk in the comments. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.